Well, y'all let me know when we should get going.
Well, I think we'll be respectful of everyone's time. If you haven't met me yet, my name is Emily. I am the Director of Student Success in the Graduate School, and I am super excited to welcome Dr. Latz to talk about Photovoice. While we're on here, if you wouldn't mind keeping your audio muted, that would be fantastic. And then obviously we love to see all your beautiful faces. So if you want to turn your camera on, that way when we're in conversation, we can see you. That would be fantastic. But otherwise, I will turn it over to our phenomenal host for the day, Dr. Latz. Dr. Latz works here at Ball State in the SAHI program and is also heavily involved in our certificate for community college leadership, and is a mentor and a friend and a fabulous human. So I am super excited to have her present to you all today. So take it away, Dr. Latz.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to Emily and all the good folks at the graduate school for the invite. If y'all are not aware of the graduate school's Gold initiative, I think it's just completely amazing and such a great way for students to get some professional development outside the formal classroom. So I am more than happy to be presenting today and talking about broadly the uses of photography in research, and then more specifically, the Photovoice methodology. So what I have done, and maybe Emily, you could spot me on this for those who are just coming into the call, I've added in the chat a link to an open access syllabus, quote unquote, that I created all about Photovoice, and then also a link to the slides that I'm going to be going through today. The syllabus is chock full of wonderful resources and information. And then the slide deck is just something that you might want to refer back to. But the slide deck is kind of just meant to be a complement to the presentation. So just keep all those things in mind. So as Emily mentioned, my name is Amanda Latz. I'm a faculty member here at Ball State. Somehow I am in my 14th year, and I am a professor of higher education and community college leadership. And as us faculty do, we tend to have areas of research that we specialize in. So one big area of research that I specialize in has to do with visual methods and methodologies, and particularly their use in my field of study, which is higher education. And if we funnel that down a bit more, my particular application of these kinds of methods and methodologies has been to use the Photovoice approach within community college populations, with students and with faculty. And that's where a lot of my experience comes from. So just a little bit of context about me and kind of where I'm coming from as it relates to this presentation. So give me a moment while I awkwardly share my screen, which, you know, even though we've been doing Zoom for a very long time, I always feel a little bit of screen share anxiety. So hopefully we have gotten this correct by now. So hopefully, ta-da, you can see my slides. I've already kind of talked about introductory type stuff, so we're going to move right on. Our agenda today is as follows. I want to just thank you all so much for making time to be in this space. I hope that this is informative for y'all, and also a space that might allow you to generate some of your own ideas for application of photography within your research, and Photovoice in particular. But you can see that we've got an agenda here. Warm welcome, we've kind of done that already. want to do some work around who's in the room and ask an animating question, which is what does an image do? And then talk through my experience with the Photovoice approach, talk about what it is, talk about what it looks like in practice, share some examples, and then kind of zig and zag a little bit, go to the origin story of Photovoice, and then think about how it's grown, where it's headed, and then maybe have some discussion, time permitting. So that said, I would love to just kind of, let's see, participate to the extent that you want to. We've got a nice big group here, so we don't necessarily have to go through and everybody introduce. But what I would like to do is facilitate some potential introductions in a really specific way. So there is this big question that I always think about, and that question is simple, but I think profound. And the question is, what does an image do? Photographs are images. There are a lot of things that constitute an image. In this instance, we want to think about photographs in particular. And I want you to just think about that for a moment. One way that I like to spur on folks thinking about this is to ask you to consider, what is the image on the lock screen of your phone? And that that's instructive and illuminating in a lot of ways. So you might want to think to yourself, okay, why did I select that particular image? How often do I change it out? And when I see that image, what happens? So I'll share a little bit just to model. So the image on my lock screen is a photo of my spouse and my dog kind of together. And it's this beautiful black and white photograph where there's a lot of joy on the countenance of my spouse, and like the dog seems happy, and it just reminds me like of the people and the dogs, I guess, that I love, etc. And it gives me a sense of grounding to the world, a connection to people and things that matter to me. So I wondered if folks feel comfortable unmuting and or participating via the chat. Maybe you could share your name, where you're coming from, and when you think of the question, what do images do? Maybe give us an answer. So yes, I see Mary. Hello, Mary. Tell us about you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary. I am a PhD student studying higher education at the University of Arizona, Bear Down Wildcats. My lock screen is actually a picture that I got from my undergraduate institution alumni association. I went to Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana, and I have it there because if people see it, they can like, hey, what's that mean? So it's a way I can talk about the really good experience at Indiana State and kind of recruit for my institution.
I love that. I love that. Mary, it's so nice to meet you and see you in
Yes.
person.
You
Thank
too,
you so
Dr.
much
Latz.
for coming. Yeah. Does anybody else want to share?
I'll share.
Yes. Tell us.
So mine is one of my favorite lines from the Throne of Glass series, if you're familiar. It says, only you can decide what breaks you, curse breaker, only you. And actually that's the wrong series. It's from the ACOTAR series. So it's a series of fantasy books, and I just really like that reminder that the hard days don't necessarily have to be the decision making points for you when you're having a tough time. Like, you get to decide your response, your reaction.
Yes. I love that. So I'm hearing these images can tell others something about you, and images can also, and I want to just note, Emily, sounds like you've got some words in your image, which we certainly are going to envelop and love, but it gives us messages. It messages to us as well. What else? Anybody else want to share? Maybe, yeah, sorry, I just got very excited. Hi, Amanda. Share.
Hey, Dr. Latz, good to see you.
Oh, no, so good to see you too.
Yeah, my name is Amanda. I am a Sahi alum, but I'm also a current PhD student at Coastal Carolina University in my third year. And my background photo of both my laptop and then my phone is a collage of photos of all of the people that are so important to me. So family members, friends, my dogs. And so specifically my dogs, kind of like what you said, Dr. Latz, when people ask like, oh, do you have a pet? That's a quick pull up, right? And that's something you can connect on and really easily share something that is important to you in that moment.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm hearing, images can showcase potentially to others what's important to us. And it's not just about sort of the cognitive relationship we have with the contents of the photograph, but also the emotional responses that it gives us and the ways that it can help us empathize with other people. I know it's cliche, but images do say 1,000 words, right? There's a difference between reading text and looking at an image. You can read about a beautiful landscape, but it takes time for our brains to kind of go through the words of that text. But when we look at a beautiful landscape, there's a certain, what the literature calls an all-at-onceness. We can take all of it in at one time versus text, which it takes us a period of time to really take it in. And images are so powerful in that way, which gives them so much utility in research. So we think about the use of photographs and images in research over time, and we think about things like history and documenting what has taken place over time and the role of photographs in the documentation of history. We can think about early anatomy and medical illustration. And now in new fields that are blooming, we're also starting to see new types of images being used within research. Just last week, I was at a talk on campus with some folks who are sort of pioneering in this new field called neuroart. And it was fascinating how they were describing a process by which we can make sound have image. And it's brilliant to think about the multiple modalities that are useful in the creation of knowledge and the dissemination of knowledge. So let's get back to the slide deck here and talk about this a little bit more. All right. All right, y'all. Well, I appreciate kind of having some conversation about this and getting to know who's in the room a little bit. The other thing that I want to know before we move on to the slide deck, and I can put these links in the chat later on, but one way to understand what images do, I think, is to look at a variety of different examples. One that I want to share with you is a comic called Robot Dreams. This is essentially a wordless comic book that tells a beautiful, endearing story without the use of any words at all. So this is a wonderful example of what images can do. And then I wanted to share one other book really quickly before moving into the slides again. This book is called Unflattening by a scholar named Nick Susanis. And this book, to me, is all about an academic treatment on what images do. This was actually Nick's dissertation that he wrote as a comic. and it's completely brilliant, and didn't want to move forward without mentioning those 2 additional resources. Both of these are actually inside the syllabus that I shared as well. So again, let's talk specifically about this Photovoice methodology. And I do want to note here that before we continue, in my treatment of Photovoice, I consider it to be a methodology or a total approach to research versus a method. In my understanding of methods versus methodologies, methods are tools that are under the umbrella of methodologies, and every Photovoice project uses a method called photo elicitation, but not every photo elicitation is Photovoice. So just an important delineation to note at the top. So what has brought me into being interested about Photovoice? Well, I used Photovoice for my doctoral dissertation back in 2010 and spilling into 2011. And that dissertation was focused on how community college students construct their educational lives. And what I did was, we'll talk about this a little bit more, is I gave a group of community college students prompts that asked them questions about their educational lives. They went out into the world and took photographs. We were old school. We were using digital cameras, took photographs in response to these prompts. Some examples were like, what's a typical day in your educational life? What makes you proud? What are some obstacles that you face in terms of being a college student, and so on and so forth. And then we met together to do a photo elicited interview about those photographs to make extended meaning of those images. And then we eventually, after a period of time, hosted a series of Photovoice exhibitions about their work. And we'll talk more about the nuts and bolts of that in a moment. But I just wanted to share, based on my dissertation, I was able to not only write the dissertation, go through the experience, but do a lot of publishing as us academics do. So here you'll see some of the examples of this work. This particular piece came from my dissertation. This particular book also came from the dissertation, and then I've since gone on to do some other important and interesting work based on the method, and even have had the opportunity to do some consulting with other entities across the US. In this example here was a part of a consultancy team with a community health foundation in Alaska. Also, I've done some workshopping and some educational opportunities to help folks understand Photovoice. And you can see here, for a few years, we hosted, this was pre-pandemic, but we hosted a couple of workshops on campus to help other folks use the methodology. So I have experience not only as doing the work, but teaching about the work. And then also, I've also more recently kind of come back to the community college environment and started to do some work in terms of sharing with students, bringing students into a research team to help explain their experiences, the things that they are encountering within the community college environment again. But in this particular iteration, which we called the Action Research Collective, which was based on a similar initiative at Ball State, which you as Ball State graduate students have access to, was really, really instrumental and deep in terms of helping students not only participate as participants, but grow in their capacities as co-researchers, getting these community college students some experience with research at the undergraduate level. We had an exhibition just recently about that. You can kind of learn more about it if you are so inclined. This is what our exhibition looked like. So this is all to say that not only in terms of studying do I have expertise in the area, but also a lot of experience. Okay, so let's zig and let's zag for a little bit here. So what is Photovoice actually? Well, Photovoice is a form of critical participatory action research. Critical insofar that it asks questions related to power, related to oppression, related to privilege, participatory in that this is not a passive experience for participants. Within Photovoice research, participants are fully participating in all elements of the process. And what that exactly looks like is going to differ from one study to the next, but it could be everything to building the photography prompts, to co-facilitating the interviews or the focus groups, to analyzing or co-analyzing the data, to building out the exhibition, and to understanding and inviting who needs to be in the room to see the results of these projects. It's action-oriented insofar as this is not the type of study that we're just trying to get published and then it sits in a repository. No, we are actively trying to make change in the world through this work. And it's research insofar that it involves systematic study. So that's important to think about. This is not your typical approach to research. This is a very almost aerobic and participatory approach that is meant to move things around in the world. Photovoice is not something that I made up. It was actually incepted in the mid-90s. I'm going to talk more about that in a moment, but it sits on what I like to call a theoretical tripod. It is informed by various forms of feminisms, and I use that plural because feminism is much more than just one thing. There are many, many, many different forms. I think the main perspective or tenet from feminism that Photovoice aims to tap into is the notion of voice, and the notion that Photovoice actively aims to make space for a multiplicity of voices, and particularly the voices of those who have been historically marginalized, silenced, rendered unheard, etc. And it sort of rejects the idea that there are voiceless people, and it reminds us that everyone has a voice, but there are forces in the world that make us pay attention to certain voices versus others, or render certain voices without a platform, and essentially silence. It also draws from Paulo Freire's ideas related to critical consciousness education. In other words, helping people move through the continuum that Freire laid out, related to kind of moving from magical to naive to critical consciousness, helping people understand the broader social and cultural forces in the world that have led to current circumstances, as a way to helping folks be empowered to change those circumstances. And then finally, Photovoice draws heavily on this idea of participatory documentary photography, this idea that photographers can document the lives of other people, but it is often mediated by the lens of that person who's doing the documenting. Whereas participatory documentary photography asks the people who are being documented to take cameras into their own hands and document their lives on their own terms. And all of these theoretical underpinnings really serve the foundation for Photovoice, at least in its original inception. Photovoice is very explicit in having 3 aims. It's not just about creating a significant original contribution to knowledge. It is about the following. It is about placing participants into a position where they document and narrate their lives on their own terms, where the quote researcher is more of a facilitator than a leader of the inquiry. It also is meant to help facilitate within participants movement toward critical consciousness. In other words, helping people understand the social and cultural forces that have led to particular kinds of circumstances. And this is critical, it actively aims to reach policymakers and people who have power to make policies, make laws, engage practices, engage procedures that have transmutations that affect the material realities of the people who were participants in the study. So again, this is not just about contributing to knowledge. It can be that, but it is also about moving and shaking in the world, which is one of the things that I absolutely love about it. Photovoice is flexible, and it can be used alongside other forms of research, assessment, and evaluation. So it can be a complement to other things like existing data that we might have about a particular community, surveys that have maybe already been done or that are in the process of being done, and certainly document analysis as well. So this is kind of giving us a bit of a primer on what Photovoice actually is. Moving on. So what does Photovoice look like in practice? And I'm going to kind of bring us through some steps or stages, but I want to give a disclaimer in that this is kind of not a waterfall series of steps. It's not the type of thing where one thing happens and leads to the next, leads to the next. It's kind of a chaotic cycle. In other words, sometimes we have to move back to where we started or skip some steps. So this is sort of a guide, and I'm using the gerunds here to help show that this is an active process. But know that sometimes when you get farther along, you might have to go back to the quote unquote beginning as you encounter some interesting hurdles or obstacles or innovations. So the first thing that most folks do when they're thinking about starting a Photovoice project is really ideating. In other words, based on your experience in the world, your reading of the literature, what is it that you would like to do? For example, in my most recent work with some students at Ivy Tech here in Muncie, the Muncie campus of Ivy Tech, which is our local community college, local community college. I worked actually with some of the campus personnel there to ideate and get ideas from them around this idea. What can we do to get an understanding of students' experiences in order to make change on campus to help students achieve more success by supporting them? And that ideation process actually was done in conjunction with the policymakers that we were trying to reach. So it was kind of this cycle where oftentimes your ideas might come from policymakers. So thinking about what you want to learn about. So let's say, for example, you want to understand, I'll use this example, you want to understand sort of what are some of the things that community college students experience that would be helpful for folks to know in order to support these students better. Okay, we've ideated. Now, the next step would be inviting folks to the table to serve as co-facilitators, to serve as participants. And you have to ask yourself whose voices really matter most here. For this particular, my most recent work, what we wanted to do was look at the existing data that the institution had related to identifying equity gaps. In other words, if we were looking at student success outcomes and some student groups based on a demography, based on using demographics and then disaggregating those data, where were some equity gaps? In other words, are we seeing that some students are faring better than others? And then how could we understand the students who are not faring as well better in order to help facilitate their success? So what we wanted to do was work with some students from particular groups who are kind of identified in these equity gaps to interrogate more and to help create spaces where these students could tell us in a really unfiltered way, like what is going on in their lives that is helping them thrive, or that where are they encountering some obstacles. So we invited students from a variety of specific demographic backgrounds. We also wanted to focus on helping students get access to research, doing research at the undergraduate level. That is quote unquote a high impact practice. So we also wanted to work with students who were transfer intending, so that they had some things that they could legitimately put on their resume related to research experience to help with that process. So again, ideating, inviting, and then educating. There is a heavy lift here in terms of helping participants know what to do to be able to participate in a Photovoice study. It's not as simple as, hey, this survey is going to take you 15 minutes. It's like, actually, this is a pretty intense process. Here are the expectations. Make sure you're managing those, and also thinking about the kinds of incentives that you want to offer to participants, considering that this is sort of less like a one-off participation in a research study, and it's more like jumping headfirst into a project. So educating in terms of helping participants understand the process. How do we take the photos that we want to take? What are we going to do in terms of getting those photographs into a space where we can all take a look at them and then narrate them, etc. Next is the image making process. So what prompts will lead to the understandings that we are seeking? Thinking about, what do you want to ask your participants to take photos in response to that really help you get at the issue or the research question that you are probing? Once that has taken place, then there's a process of narration where the participants, either in interviews or focus groups, really talk about the images that they have created. Because as sort of a researcher or an outsider, you could look at a particular image and think it means one thing, but then have the conversation with the participant and learn that actually they meant something totally, totally different. I remember a couple of years ago working with some students, and a student took a photograph of a lighthouse in the background, and then there were some ducks on a rock in the foreground. And I remember when I first saw the image, I was thinking that the lighthouse had something to do with, like, I'm moving toward my goal. You know, the lighthouse reminds me of where I'm going. But when I talked to the student was taking a picture of the ducks. And the student was talking about how, you know, these ducks were together and they were supporting one another. And really the message had nothing to do with the lighthouse, which is so important, because we can have the photos, but we need the narration or the voice to really create these image, text, or narration amalgams to share the meaning. This isn't necessarily like a Photovoice exhibition isn't like an art exhibition where the beholder is encouraged to make meaning on their own. We really kind of do that work for the beholder by sharing the voice that goes along with the image. Moving right along, a theming process then takes place where either the facilitators or the facilitators and the participants kind of come together and say, what do we see here? What are the patterns? What are the themes? And how can we agree on which messages matter most that we want to put forward in the form of what we might call results, findings, themes, etc., that we really want to communicate to policymakers who have a stake in this particular issue. Moving along again, Then, oftentimes Photovoice projects do yield text-based artifacts, like books, like journal articles, like coffee table books. But they also necessarily include some kind of exhibition-like dissemination. And this can take a lot of forms. It can take the form of like a gallery type exhibition. It can take the form of a website, a YouTube video, etc. But this is the phase where the results or the themes or the findings are conveyed to the surrounding community, to the people who have a stake in it, to participants themselves, to participants' families. And when you're thinking about this part of the process, you need to ask who needs to see this and make specific invitations. And you also need to think about what's the best way to present this information, which is more cognitively complex than you might consider. There's a huge literature on museum learning that's actually really helpful in thinking about how to do this work. And then the final step, and again, it's sort of an artificial step, but one of the final parts of the process is asking yourself and asking your community what has happened as a result of the work. Has a policy changed? Have folks within the community gotten access to new kinds of resources? Has there been simply a broader understanding and empathy building among people as it relates to the folks who we have worked with here? So again, this is kind of a process that is malleable, that often has fits and starts, that requires us to kind of go backwards and forwards, and it's very iterative. Okay, moving on. So what are some examples of Photovoice projects? I just brought together a couple of things that I thought might be interesting to folks and that are nestled in my particular discipline, higher education, community college leadership. So you see here, working with college students who have disabilities, how can we use Photovoice to create a more inclusive campus? Interesting work here. What are the experiences of first-gen college students, and what can we be doing to help support those students? Working with particular student groups, for example, top right, we see work with Black males to uncover campus issues. And then the fat college students are both visible in a hyper visible way, but also invisible as it relates to furniture and a whole host of things that make the college environment sometimes very difficult to navigate. And just beautiful work here. So let me continue going. To go along with that, some of these examples that I put on the screen are wonderful exhibitions vis-a-vis websites. So the Fat on Campus team has an amazing website that I would encourage you to check out. The bottom left here shows a beautiful project done from Dr. Zarate, and he worked with Filipino community college students. And again, just amazing examples of the potential of Photovoice and what can be done. All right, so I'm going to zig and I'm going to zag again, like I mentioned. Photovoice is not new. It was a methodology that was worked on and accepted in the mid-90s by Carolyn Wong and Mary Ann Burris. And you can see some of the original literature that came from their work. They worked with women in rural villages in China. And going back to some of the original scholarship on Photovoice, is, I think, such an important step in any photo voice researcher's journey. And I would encourage you to, I know it may not, be flashy or whatever, but reading some of the original stuff can be so instructive to understand how the methodology has grown and changed over the years. And we're coming up now on about 30 years of photo voice research really coming into the world and proliferating. How has photo voice grown? It's been really interesting to watch photo voice not only be used as a research approach, but also as a pedagogical tool. So in other words, how are scholars using photo voice as a learning tool within their campuses and within their classrooms? So we see some interesting work with photo voice as pedagogy. And then I think something that's got folks talking a lot and that we're still trying to sort of grapple with and understand better is how do we do photo voice in virtual spaces? How do we do photo voice online? How can we leverage technology in ways that are ethical and helpful to think more about how photo voice is done and how we might want to do it? While also sort of paying homage and being true to some of its original intentions and the ways in which that it has been used. I will share, there's a lot of stuff out there in the research that says it's photo voice, but from my vantage point, I would argue that is actually not photo voice. But it'll be interesting to see how things are continuing to move forward. The photo voice literature is something that I try to actively stay engaged with. This book right here, I don't know if you can see my little rectangle as I'm presenting, but new books are coming out all the time. I've got this one here, Photo Voice Reimagined by Nicole Brown on my shelf. It's a 2024 copyright date. So really, really exciting to see the proliferation and how other scholars have been using the work. All right, so we've got about 15 minutes or so, and I'm going to stop my screen share. And I would love to just open up and see if folks have questions, if there's other things that you would like me to talk about, or if you have specific questions about projects that you are doing or that you want to do. So would love to hear from y'all now. If it's easier for you to put something in the chat versus speak it out, more than happy to engage in that way, but would love for y'all to unmute and ask questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, Rachel, good to see you.
Howdy, good to see you.
Hey.
I have a question. I am doing my research on female college students with ADHD, and I'm using Photo Voice. Dr. Shelley recommended that from just the way I'm wired. She thought it would be a good approach. Now, here's my situation. I'm doing my comps next semester, so around about March. I'm trying to get my proposal done so I can have boots on the ground, because I have to have access to students, so I have a narrow window of time.
Yes.
So from start to finish, about how long does this process kind of take?
Ooh, Rachel, that is a good question.
I know.
So, so as with all research, right, there are some significant elements that we just do not have control over. And we need to just do our due diligence to try to make the best plans that we can. But then as we encounter the inevitable hurdles and bumps in the road, we need to innovate and we need to find ways to remove those obstacles or move around them. Now, when I work with my doctoral students and just generally kind of advising them, I say, okay, it's probably going to be about 1 calendar year from the time that you get IRB approval to the time you are done with your EDD, PhD, your doctoral degree, your dissertation. But, there are so many factors that influence that. And, those factors include the number of folks that you want to invite to the study And if you look at the Photovoice literature, the participant range is gigantic. It's like a handful to like over 100. I would argue that those over 100, they're not necessarily Photovoice. So, you know, I have a very unsatisfying answer for you, and that is it really depends. But you can be intentional about suggesting due dates, for supporting students in their roles as participants in your study, trying to make things as easy as possible for them to do. So I know that that's very unsatisfying, but I also think it depends on sort of like what your schedule is and how
yeah.
quickly you can work and etc. I would say though, you know, how far along you go and what I would consider sort of the Photovoice cycle is really something that you ought to talk to your committee about. So I defended my dissertation, my Photovoice dissertation, before the exhibition took place. So in my dissertation, I did not write about the exhibition. That came later. So I guess another point would be you have to like kind of communicate with your committee about, well, what is the dissertation? And then what is the full project? Because you know, you don't necessarily have to put your whole project into your dissertation. So I don't have a very satisfying answer for you, but I would be happy, you know, once you're in the thick of things, maybe we could do a meetup and just chat through it so that I can be more specific
I
for
have to
you.
be done by December 2025, so
Okay,
I'm
you
on
can
the
do
fast
this.
track. I'm on the fast track.
You can do this.
Because our program chair is retiring. She said, I got y'all through December 2025. I'm like, I'm done. I'm like,
All
I
right.
can't.
All right. All right. You can
Thank
do,
you.
you can do this. There are ways that you can do it for
I was
sure.
thinking about, you know, I don't want to kind of like cherry pick my participants, but maybe if there's some undergraduate students who are here through the summer, I'm just thinking it may spill over a little bit.
Yeah.
And if you're not here locally,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Yeah. Well, you know, it could also be the type of thing where you engage in what's called online photo voice, and you ask those students to reflect back on, like, if they're not on campus, reflect back on when they were on campus.
Okay.
There's so many things that you can do to make this feasible. Yeah. Do not despair. You can do this.
I will not. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions from folks?
I
Hello?
don't have a question. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
It's okay. All right. Thank you very much for the presentation, which of course brought actually Photovoice down to heart. And I want to find out, yes, I've been involved in a Photovoice research through a grant with some partners across 2 countries. And then it was very insightful and we were very happy at the output of at the end of the day. I want to find out if there are open access softwares, because in that particular project, I think it was in partnership with Stanford University. Of course, they granted us access, you know, to their platform to be able to store the pictures taken by people and then the narratives associated narratives. So I want to find out whether there are open access, you know, softwares that could be used for that purpose, you know, so that once you have the participants are recruited, once you have the objective and awareness created, once they understand what they need to do on daily basis, or maybe 2 or 3 times in a day at specific intervals, then that can help, you know, to host the data before everything is downloaded. I'm just thinking whether there are open access softwares that could help in this regard. Thank
That
you.
is,
Over.
oh, that is such a good question. And I am not aware of any freely available open access software specifically for Photovoice. Now, it may exist, and I just may not know about it. But in terms of free open access, I think that there are ways that you can use existing free open access tools and sort of repurpose them for Photovoice use. So let me give you a few examples of things that I have done with varying degrees of success, and maybe one or two things that I've seen other people do. So I think the Google Drive and the Google suite of products is really helpful in facilitating these kinds of projects. You can either give your participants direct access to a Google Drive folder that they can upload their images to, or create a Google form that they can upload their images to, and then include potentially captions, narrations. They can do you could do a drop-down menu so that they can select which prompt they're responding to. So that is one way that you can use the Google suite of products to really facilitate a project like this. And I haven't done it, but I would imagine that you can also use a variety of other cloud-based housing services like OneDrive, etc. I've also seen people do brilliant work using social media for this purpose, where I've seen folks have participants create private Instagram accounts that were all connected to one another, that were for the purpose of the project. And the beautiful thing about Instagram is you can upload the image, you can manipulate the image, you can have a long caption, and then use hashtags as a way to almost code the images. This can also be facilitated through platforms like Facebook and private groups in that way. But I do, again, I'm not aware of something that's Photovoice specific, that's open access and free, but you can use a lot of existing things and tools to make this happen by kind of retrofitting them for your purposes, that's kind of what I have been in the practice of doing. But that's a beautiful question, and I love that, and thank you for asking that. We've also got a question in the chat that I want to speak out. This is from Suzanne. Amazing that you're coming from Scotland. Let's see. My question is, are there any resources you recommend around training co-researchers, participants, around Photovoice ethics before they go out and start taking photos, as well as around basic skills in photography and using a camera? I'm using Photovoice in the context of victimology and sexual consent education with young people. I think that is a great question, Suzanne. What I would recommend doing, and this is maybe an unsatisfying answer, is that there is a lot of content about this specific question in the literature. Everything from how to think about power when you're wielding a camera or a smartphone, to literally keeping yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally safe while you're engaging in the process of photography. So it might require a little bit of work, but I would search your library databases for similar projects and see if you can find information within the literature about the trainings that others have done, and then use kind of a bespoke process where you pull from other projects and create kind of your own training materials that are really contextually and culturally relevant for your participants. So for example, I'll just give a quick story. Let me also just say that you have to think about the social and personal identities of your participants. I had a participant in my dissertation study who was trying to take a photograph of a green light. And the green light that she was trying to take a photograph of was in front of City Hall, where we live. And so when the light would turn red, she would kind of like very strategically go into the road, take the photograph, go back on the sidewalk, and she was taking a photograph towards City Hall. And she was unbeknownst to her, being observed. And somebody came out to ask, like, what are you doing? They thought that she was taking photos of the building. And, you know, this was a middle-aged, middle-class white woman doing this photography with a disposable camera, which is kind of that has some social implications. People don't see that in the world very much anymore. So that was sort of one thing, but if she had had some different social identities, that interaction may have gone very differently. So my best and unsatisfying advice would be to dive into the literature on ethics and training and know that there's a lot out there. If you take a look at my Photovoice syllabus, there is a section or two on ethics. That might be a good starting point for you, Suzanne. So hopefully that was helpful. And truly, you might find that young people are just incredibly crafty with how, I mean, many young people are very good at taking photographs for the purposes of social media. And so they know kind of how to do things in certain ways for certain audiences. So you might find that they need a little bit less instruction that you think, but I always kind of give some ground rules depending on my IRB or what I believe to be ethical around pictures of other people, and also just things that might happen to be illegal. So that's important to think about as well.
Dr. Latz, if I could
Yeah.
interject a thought for Suzanne, in terms of like the quality of the picture, I actually had the opportunity to do a Photovoice project with Dr. Latz, and we used disposable cameras, and it was actually, it made like my participants, his novice at using a camera, made it more endearing, because that was really, you know, what he was perceiving and how he was viewing the subjects that he was. So it's almost like you want them to be authentic to the participant and not like a photographer grade quality. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about camera and picture capabilities and allow them to be more authentic to the participant.
That's a great point, Emily. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't love the use of disposable cameras right now because of the word disposable. But I think in the current moment, I mean, I have like 10,000 photos on my iPhone. And to me, that feels a little bit more disposable than, like, if I were to use film now, okay, that's like, I gotta be serious. I only have this many exposures. I only have this and that and the other. So in a lot of ways, it's a lot more higher stakes and a lot more like, it's just different now. I don't know if that makes any sense. So Martin had something in the comment. There is some open access software to apply theory of change. Not sure if it would work with Photovoice. However, the advantage of a participatory approach in the room, I'm not convinced this translates to online spaces. Martin, I think that's a really, really lovely point and something that I think about a lot. Yeah, I have never done an online Photovoice project. A lot of people have, especially during the pandemic. But in the most recent Photovoice project that I've done, it was in person. We used tech tools as a complement, but it felt more like the Wong and Burris sort of original conception of the idea than anything that I had done before. It was like slow research. It was very intentional, very intimate, very like relationship rich. So I tend to agree with you there. Yeah, so should participants use their smartphones? I think it depends on the participants, but I think that is absolutely yes. It's easy, it's convenient. Many people have smartphones and are very used to using them. So I would say, let me back up. You should ask your participants if we're being like true. But most of them will probably say that that's their preference just because it's so simple and they have a lot of skills with it. Ty, hello. Tell me your question. So good to see you.
Hi there, so good to see you too. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Ty.
Those of you, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ty Garrican. I work as in the admissions communications suite, specifically at Ball State, but I live in Fishers, Indiana. Um, so I am a Sahi grad, but I have a lot of experience specifically in creativity and design, and that's primarily what I do in my career now. And so from day to day, as I'm conceptualizing various designs and doing print and web type things, I'm always thinking about what kind of stories can photos tell. And so much that I love photography and I started my own photography business. And I don't know if it's my education background and what I learned in grad school and just kind of the nature of working in higher education, but it really informs a lot of what I do. And I don't know that I really have a question for you, Dr. Latz, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate like how important I think that this topic and it is for the general public, whether or not they realize it or not. For example, I've taken photos of individuals that have been more portraits, but also specific events. I think about a year ago, I shot a jiu-jitsu event. They were raising money. They said, "Hey, we would love for you to take photos and sponsor the event." And I said, "I haven't done something like this in a long time, but I think it would be great." And I think it was so much more than just showing like this is what these people do, but this is a community. And I think just really kind of reiterating the fact that there are these micro communities of people who come together to do specific things, and it can be very informative in addition to just sharing what it is that they enjoy doing. And from a photographer's perspective, yes, I do use a nicer digital camera, but I notice a lot of times when I'm working with clients, or in this case, it could be your test subjects, they may be very uncomfortable when you whip out a camera versus if you bring out your iPhone or you bring out some type of, camera phone in general, that may make them feel a little bit more comfortable because half of my job is not only taking the photos, but the other half is really just making the clients or the subject feel comfortable in front of the camera, knowing that they've got this microscope on them.
I think that is such, first of all, Ty, your photographs are stunning.
Thank you.
I have loved seeing that grow through Facebook and just amazing. And I think that's such a good point. The other thing that I want to just share is that I also see a lot of potential in what I'm conceptualizing right now called art voice, where rather than relegate only to photography, it depends on the project, but also giving participants a palette of artful ways to respond to prompts. And I really started thinking about this last fall, I believe it was. I was teaching a course on community colleges, and one of my discussion forums was asking students to draw a picture of a community college student and then do a variety of other things. And this was based on the classic Draw a Scientist test. And one of my students just beautifully, conscientiously objected and said, "I don't really draw, but I cross stitch." And she cross stitched a community college student and upload. And I was like, because I thought, well, maybe not everybody wants to take a photo, but they could sculpt, they could paint, they could create poetry. So I think that's another interesting area that I'm thinking about and would like to see some of this work go into, because there are so many ways that human beings convey ideas. And I think that we can tap into that more, because the more ways that we can allow folks to express themselves authentically, the better. And just the more and different kinds of action we could create in the world. So just a thought. Okay. Emily, I know that we're over time. So do you want to
Well, I
wrap
mean, I
up?
think we could all talk to you for a bajillion hours. Yes, we do need to wrap up to be conscious of everyone's time. But thank you so much. And we love you, obviously, over here at the grad school. And I will tell you that if you are considering Photovoice for any of your research, just dive in and do it. It's so fun, and it's a unique perspective to offer the world on the research that you're doing. So thank you, Dr. Latz. Thank you everyone for joining us. We did post the link to the syllabus. So if you have more questions, Dr. Latz's contact information is in there. And yeah, we wish you a great rest of your day, and let us know if there's anything the grad school can do to help you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is great. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.